Sergeant Jake Harrison had learned to read injuries the way other people read books, carefully, thoroughly, and with the understanding that missing important details could have consequences that lasted far longer than the initial trauma. The embassy's medical wing on Zeland Prime smelled like antiseptic and ozone, a combination that always reminded him of field hospitals where split-second decisions determined who went home and who didn't. "Sergeant Harrison," Ambassador Chen said, her voice carrying the diplomatic weight of someone who'd spent years turning potential disasters into manageable complications, "I need you to understand that Princess Lyra isn't just another protection assignment." Harrison nodded, reviewing the security briefing on his tactical display while simultaneously cataloging the medical equipment available in the embassy's treatment facilities. Old habits from his combat medic days died hard, and he'd learned that the best protection often involved being prepared for medical emergencies as well as security threats. "The Zelonians consider personal protection a matter of honor and strength," Chen continued. "Previous human guards have been unsuccessful because they approached the assignment from purely tactical perspectives without understanding the cultural nuances involved." "What kind of cultural nuances?" Harrison asked, though he suspected he knew the answer from his briefings on Zelonian warrior culture. "The kind where accepting help is viewed as admission of weakness, where showing pain is considered shameful, and where the concept of gentle care is essentially foreign," Chen replied. "Princess Lyra represents the progressive faction of Zelonian society, but she's still been raised in a culture that equates vulnerability with failure." Harrison studied the medical reports from the terrorist bombing that had killed Princess Lyra's previous guards and left her with what Zelonian healers had classified as minor injuries unworthy of extended treatment. His medic training immediately flagged several concerns about injuries that had been inadequately assessed due to cultural biases against thorough medical examination. "Ambassador, the medical reports indicate she refused treatment beyond basic wound cleaning," Harrison observed. "Some of these injuries require ongoing monitoring to prevent complications." "Which is exactly why I requested you specifically," Chen said. "Your medical background makes you uniquely qualified to provide protection that addresses both security and health concerns." Harrison made his way through the embassy's corridors toward the medical wing, noting security vulnerabilities and potential medical evacuation routes with the automatic assessment that came from years of protecting people who were often too proud or too scared to acknowledge they needed protection. The explosion had occurred during a cultural exchange dinner, targeting the one event where Zelonian and human dignitaries mingled in informal settings. He found Princess Lyra in Treatment Room 3, sitting rigidly upright on a medical examination table while refusing to make eye contact with the Zelonian healers who were attempting to document her injuries for official reports. Her dark hair was braided in complex patterns that indicated royal status, and her clothing, formal diplomatic attire now torn and stained with blood, showed evidence of someone who'd been close enough to the explosion to be thrown against hard surfaces. "Your Highness," Harrison said formally, approaching with the careful movements he'd learned to use around patients who associated medical attention with loss of control. "I'm Sergeant Harrison, assigned as your protection detail." Princess Lyra looked up at him with amber eyes that held the kind of wariness Harrison recognized from soldiers who'd learned not to trust easily. "Another human guard," she said, her standard tinged with the musical accent that made Zelonian voices sound like weapons designed to be beautiful. "I assume you've been briefed on my people's expectations regarding protection services." "I've been briefed on standard protocols," Harrison replied, "but I'd prefer to hear your expectations directly." The princess blinked, apparently surprised by the question. "My expectations?" "You're the person I'm protecting," Harrison said, pulling up a chair to bring himself to her eye level rather than looming over her. "Your comfort and preferences matter as much as tactical considerations." Behind Princess Lyra, Nurse Kethera, elderly Zelonian medical attendant whose bioluminescent skin patterns indicated both advanced age and significant medical knowledge, made a sound that might have been amusement. "Sergeant Harrison," Princess Lyra said carefully, "Zelonian protection protocols focus on threat elimination and tactical superiority. Personal comfort is considered secondary to operational efficiency. Human protection protocols focus on keeping the person being protected alive, healthy, and as comfortable as possible while doing it," Harrison replied. "Would you mind if I conducted my own assessment of your injuries?" I'd like to establish a baseline for monitoring your recovery. The healers have already completed their examination, Princess Lyra said, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely satisfied with their conclusions. I'm sure they have, Harrison said diplomatically, but I approach medical assessment from a different perspective. Combat medic training focuses on identifying injuries that might not be immediately obvious but could become complications later. Nurse Kethera stepped forward, her luminescent patterns shifting to colors Harrison's cultural briefings had identified as indicating curiosity. Sergeant, are you suggesting that our medical evaluation was inadequate? I'm suggesting that different medical traditions might identify different priorities, Harrison said carefully. In human medicine, we've learned that thorough initial assessment prevents more serious problems from developing. Princess Lyra studied Harrison with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle that didn't fit familiar patterns. Very well, Sergeant. You may conduct your assessment. Harrison activated his medical scanner, a device that combined human diagnostic technology with cultural sensitivity protocols developed specifically for interspecies medical care. Princess, I'm going to start with non-contact scanning to assess overall injury patterns, then ask permission before examining specific areas that might require physical contact. You're asking permission? Princess Lyra asked, her surprise evident. Medical examination requires trust, Harrison said, positioning his scanner to evaluate the bruising along her left shoulder and arm. Trust requires consent. I won't touch you or examine any area without your explicit permission. As Harrison worked, he noticed that Princess Lyra was watching his movements with fascination, as if she'd never encountered someone who approached medical care as a collaborative process rather than something done to her regardless of her comfort. The shoulder bruising suggests impact with a hard surface at significant velocity, Harrison noted, studying his scanner readings. Are you experiencing any numbness or tingling in your fingers? Some, Princess Lyra admitted reluctantly. That indicates possible nerve compression from tissue swelling, Harrison explained, making notes in his medical log. With your permission, I'd like to examine the area more closely to determine if we need to implement compression therapy. Behind them, Nurse Kethera was watching the examination with growing interest, her skin patterns cycling through colors that suggested she was reassessing her initial impressions of human medical capabilities. Princess, may I examine your shoulder? Harrison asked, holding his hands where she could see them. When she nodded, Harrison's touch was gentle and professional, his fingers carefully probing for signs of deeper tissue damage while monitoring her facial expressions for indications of pain she might not verbally acknowledge. The tissue swelling is significant but manageable, Harrison said, completing his examination. I'd recommend ice therapy and anti-inflammatory medication to prevent the swelling from affecting nerve function. Ice therapy? Princess Lyra asked. Cold application to reduce inflammation and provide pain relief, Harrison explained. It's a simple treatment, but effective for this type of injury. Nurse Kethera made another sound that was definitely amusement. Sergeant Harrison, your examination technique is quite different from our standard protocols. How so? Harrison asked, genuinely curious about Zolonian medical practices. You explain each step, ask permission for contact, and prioritize patient comfort over assessment speed, Kethera observed. Most unusual for someone with military training. Harrison paused in his documentation to consider the observation. In human military medicine, we've learned that patients who feel safe and informed heal faster than those who feel like they're being processed through a system that doesn't care about their individual needs. Princess Lyra was studying Harrison with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. Sergeant, why did you choose to become a combat medic? Because I wanted to protect people, Harrison said simply. Not just from external threats, but from unnecessary suffering. Seemed like healing and protecting were different aspects of the same job. Healing and protecting, Princess Lyra repeated thoughtfully. In Zolonian culture, those are considered separate disciplines with different honor codes. Maybe that's why you need a human guard, Harrison suggested, returning to his medical assessment. Someone who doesn't see them as separate. As he continued his examination, documenting injuries that previous assessments had dismissed as insignificant, Harrison noticed that Princess Lyra was gradually relaxing, her responses becoming more honest about pain levels and functional limitations. "Princess, how long have you been experiencing pain in your lower back?" Harrison asked, noting muscle tension patterns that suggested chronic discomfort. "That's not related to the bombing," Princess Lyra said quickly. "I understand, but it affects your overall physical status," Harrison replied. "As your protection detail, I need to know about any factors that might influence your mobility or response capabilities." "The back pain is from training exercises," Princess Lyra admitted reluctantly. "It's been present for several months." Harrison's scanner revealed muscle damage consistent with repeated trauma rather than single incidents. "Princess, with respect, this appears to be injury from inadequately treated previous trauma rather than normal training effects." Nurse Cathera's skin patterns shifted to deep blues that Harrison's briefings had indicated meant concern or worry. "Sergeant, are you suggesting that Her Highness has been receiving inadequate medical care?" "I'm suggesting that different medical traditions have different approaches to pain management and injury treatment," Harrison said diplomatically. "In human medicine, we've learned that addressing chronic pain improves overall function and quality of life." Princess Lyra was quiet for a moment, processing this perspective. "Sergeant Harrison, in your medical training, is pain considered something to be eliminated or something to be endured?" "Pain is considered information," Harrison said. "It tells us what needs attention. Eliminating unnecessary pain allows the body to focus energy on healing rather than simply surviving discomfort." "That's a very different philosophy from our healing traditions," Princess Lyra observed. "Different doesn't mean wrong," Harrison said. "Just different priorities and methods." As he completed his initial assessment, Harrison realized that protecting Princess Lyra would require more than tactical security. It would require bridging the gap between cultures that define strength and vulnerability in fundamentally different ways. "Sergeant," Nurse Cathera said as Harrison documented his findings, "your examination methodology is quite thorough for someone who is supposed to be providing protection rather than medical care." Harrison looked up from his medical display, meeting the nurse's curious gaze. "In my experience, the best protection comes from understanding exactly what you're protecting and what threats might not be immediately obvious." "Including medical threats?" "Including the threat that comes from injuries that aren't properly treated becoming complications that could compromise the person's safety," Harrison said. "Princess Lyra, with your permission, I'd like to implement a monitoring protocol that tracks your injury recovery alongside standard security procedures." Princess Lyra studied him with an expression that suggested she was reconsidering everything she thought she knew about human protection services. "You're proposing to combine medical care with security services?" "I'm proposing to provide complete protection," Harrison said. "Physical security, medical monitoring, and whatever other support you need to stay safe and healthy." "That's..." Princess Lyra paused, searching for words. "That's not how protection services typically function in Zalonian culture." "Then maybe it's time to try a different approach," Harrison suggested. "One that prioritizes your well-being rather than just your survival." Harrison's second examination of Princess Lyra took place 3 days after the bombing, in the embassy's private medical suite where he'd established what he diplomatically called enhanced monitoring protocols, and what the princess had begun referring to as Harrison's peculiar attention to details no one else notices. "Your Highness," Harrison said, reviewing his medical scanner readings, "the shoulder inflammation has decreased significantly since we began the ice therapy, but I'm concerned about these older injury patterns I'm seeing." Princess Lyra sat on the examination table wearing clothing that allowed access to injured areas while maintaining the dignity that Zalonian culture demanded of royalty. Her posture had improved since their first meeting, though Harrison suspected that had more to do with reduced pain than with any change in her natural bearing. "Older injuries?" she asked, though her tone suggested she knew exactly what he was referring to. "Healed fractures in your ribs, scar tissue in your shoulder that's at least 6 months old, and muscle damage patterns that suggest repeated trauma rather than single incidents," Harrison said, his voice carrying the careful neutrality he'd learned to use when discussing sensitive medical findings. Princess, these aren't training injuries, they're evidence of inadequate medical attention following significant trauma. Nurse Cathera, who had taken to observing Harrison's examinations with the fascination of someone studying an exotic medical technique, shifted her bioluminescent patterns to the deep purples that indicated concern. Sergeant Harrison, are you suggesting that Her Highness has been deliberately neglecting medical care? I'm suggesting that Her Highness has been receiving medical care that prioritizes rapid return to function over complete healing, Harrison corrected diplomatically. The difference in approach creates different long-term outcomes. Explain the difference, Princess Lyra said, her amber eyes studying Harrison with the intensity she usually reserved for diplomatic negotiations. Harrison activated his holographic display, showing comparative healing models that illustrated human versus Zolonian medical approaches. Human medicine focuses on eliminating pain and restoring full function, even if that requires longer recovery times. Zolonian medicine appears to focus on functional adequacy while accepting chronic discomfort as normal. Chronic discomfort builds tolerance and mental strength, Princess Lyra said, reciting what was obviously cultural doctrine. Pain teaches valuable lessons about the consequences of weakness. Pain teaches the nervous system to expect suffering, Harrison countered gently. When pain becomes chronic, it actually interferes with healing and can create new health problems. As he spoke, Harrison's hands moved carefully over the areas of old injury, his touch professional but noticeably gentle as he assessed tissue health and range of motion. Princess Lyra watched his movements with fascination, as if she'd never encountered someone who approached medical examination as something that should be comfortable rather than endured. Sergeant, she said quietly, why do you touch injured areas so carefully? Zolonian healers are typically more direct in their examination techniques. Because unnecessary pain during examination serves no medical purpose, Harrison replied, checking her shoulder mobility. My goal is to gather information while causing as little discomfort as possible. Nurse Cathera made the sound that Harrison had learned indicated amusement. Too careful for a soldier, she observed, her skin patterns shifting to the golds and greens that suggested she was making important mental notes. Most military personnel approach medical procedures with efficiency rather than gentleness. I learned that efficiency and gentleness aren't mutually exclusive, Harrison said, completing his range of motion assessment. Patients who feel safe during examination provide more accurate information about their symptoms. Safe, Princess Lyra repeated, testing the word as if it were a foreign concept. Sergeant Harrison, do you believe medical examination should feel safe? I believe everything should feel as safe as possible, Harrison replied. Medical care, protection services, diplomatic negotiations, all of it works better when people feel secure and respected. Princess Lyra was quiet for several minutes as Harrison continued his examination, documenting the extensive evidence of previous injuries that had been inadequately treated. When she spoke again, her voice carried a vulnerability that Harrison suspected she rarely allowed others to hear. Sergeant, in Zolonian culture, accepting comfort during medical treatment is considered weak. Pain tolerance is viewed as a measure of worthiness for leadership positions. And what do you think about that philosophy? Harrison asked, adjusting his scanner settings to examine deeper tissue layers. I think, Princess Lyra said slowly, that I've spent so many years proving my pain tolerance that I've forgotten what it feels like to not hurt constantly. Harrison stopped his examination and looked directly at her, his expression serious. Princess, constant pain isn't a sign of strength, it's a sign of untreated medical conditions that could be resolved with proper care. Proper care meaning your human approach to pain elimination. Proper care meaning an approach that prioritizes your long-term health and quality of life over short-term demonstrations of endurance, Harrison clarified. There's a difference between choosing to endure necessary discomfort and accepting unnecessary suffering. Nurse Cathera leaned forward, her bioluminescent patterns cycling through colors that indicated intense curiosity. Sergeant Harrison, could you explain the practical difference between these approaches? Harrison pulled up comparative treatment protocols on his display. For example, the rib fractures that Princess Lyra sustained approximately 8 months ago were treated with basic pain suppressants and immobilization until functional healing occurred. Human protocol would include anti-inflammatory medications, physical therapy to prevent scar tissue formation, and ongoing monitoring to ensure complete bone remodeling. And the practical difference in outcomes? Princess Lyra asked. The difference between tolerating chronic discomfort that limits your physical capabilities, and achieving complete recovery that allows for full function without pain, Harrison said. Princess, with your permission, I'd like to implement some additional treatment protocols that could address these older injuries. You want to treat injuries that have already healed? I want to optimize your physical condition so that your body can function at its full potential rather than compensating for chronic damage, Harrison corrected. Better physical condition means better ability to respond to threats, better endurance during diplomatic activities, and honestly, a better quality of life. Princess Lyra studied Harrison's medical displays, her expression thoughtful. And this treatment would involve physical therapy to address muscle compensation patterns, anti-inflammatory protocols to reduce chronic tissue irritation, and possibly some corrective procedures to address scar tissue that's interfering with normal function, Harrison explained. All of it designed to reduce pain and improve capability. You're suggesting that reducing pain would actually make me stronger? I'm suggesting that eliminating pain that serves no useful purpose would allow your body to function more efficiently, Harrison said. Chronic pain creates stress responses that drain energy and interfere with cognitive function. Nurse Cathera's patterns shifted to bright yellows that Harrison's cultural briefings had identified as indicating surprise or revelation. Sergeant, are you saying that pain tolerance training might actually be counterproductive for optimal performance? I'm saying that there's a difference between being able to function despite pain when necessary, and choosing to live with pain when it could be eliminated, Harrison replied. Both are valuable skills, but they serve different purposes. Princess Lyra was quiet for a long moment, her amber eyes studying Harrison's face as if trying to determine whether he was proposing something revolutionary or simply common sense from a different perspective. Sergeant Harrison, she said finally, if I were to agree to your additional treatment protocols, how would that affect my security status? Zelonian protection services don't typically accommodate extended medical care. Human protection services accommodate whatever the protected person needs to stay safe and healthy, Harrison said. Medical treatment, physical therapy, dietary considerations, psychological support, all of it falls under comprehensive protection. Psychological support? Princess Lyra asked, her tone suggesting this was another foreign concept. Protection from threats includes protection from the psychological impact of trauma, stress, and isolation, Harrison explained. Mental health affects physical health, which affects overall security. Nurse Cathera made another amused sound. Sergeant, your approach to protection services is remarkably comprehensive. Most guards focus exclusively on preventing physical threats. Most physical threats are easier to prevent when the person being protected is in optimal physical and mental condition, Harrison said. Besides, what's the point of keeping someone alive if you don't also help them maintain the quality of life that makes being alive worthwhile? Princess Lyra looked at Harrison with an expression that suggested she was reconsidering fundamental assumptions about strength, protection, and the relationship between the two. Very well, Sergeant, she said. I agree to your comprehensive protection protocols. But I have a condition. What condition? I want to understand your reasoning for each treatment recommendation, Princess Lyra said. If I'm going to challenge cultural norms about pain tolerance and medical care, I want to fully understand the alternative philosophy I'm adopting. Fair enough, Harrison agreed. Though I should warn you that human medical philosophy tends to prioritize individual comfort and choice in ways that might conflict with Zelonian concepts of duty and endurance. Perhaps, Princess Lyra said thoughtfully, it's time I learned whether there are forms of strength that don't require constant suffering. Harrison smiled, recognizing the courage it took for someone raised in a warrior culture to question fundamental assumptions about pain and healing. Princess, I think you're going to discover that choosing to heal completely takes more courage than choosing to endure chronic damage. "We shall see, Sergeant," Princess Lyra replied. "We shall see." As Harrison began implementing treatment protocols that prioritized the princess's comfort and long-term health over cultural expectations of stoic endurance, Nurse Kethera observed their interactions with growing fascination and what appeared to be approval. "Too careful for a soldier," she murmured again, but this time her tone suggested that being too careful might be exactly what the situation required. 2 weeks into Harrison's protection assignment, Princess Lyra was moving with a fluidity that Nurse Kethera hadn't seen since before the princess's intensive warrior training had begun years earlier. The combination of proper pain management, physical therapy, and what Harrison diplomatically called optimized recovery protocols had eliminated chronic discomfort that Lyra had grown so accustomed to that she'd forgotten movement could be effortless. "Sergeant Harrison," Princess Lyra said, entering the embassy's secure gymnasium where he was reviewing security footage from the morning's diplomatic meetings, "I need to discuss something with you." Harrison looked up from his tactical displays, immediately noting the tension in her posture that suggested either security concerns or personal discomfort. "What's the situation, Princess?" "The situation is that I feel better than I have in years," Lyra said, settling into the chair across from his workstation with movements that no longer showed evidence of compensating for chronic pain. "And I'm beginning to understand why that might be problematic." "Problematic how?" Harrison asked, though he suspected he knew where this conversation was headed. "Problematic because pain tolerance is considered a fundamental qualification for Zolonian leadership," Lyra explained. "If word reaches the traditional faction that I've been receiving what they would consider weakness training, it could undermine my political position." Harrison saved his security analysis and gave Lyra his full attention, recognizing that they were discussing threats that went beyond physical security into the realm of political survival. "Princess, are you saying that effective medical treatment could be used against you as evidence of unfitness for leadership?" "I'm saying that in Zolonian culture, choosing comfort over endurance is viewed as moral weakness," Lyra said. "The traditionalists already question my suitability for diplomatic roles because of my support for peaceful coexistence with humanity. And seeking medical care that eliminates pain would give them additional ammunition," Harrison concluded. "Exactly." Lyra paused, studying Harrison's expression. "Sergeant, I need to know whether you think the benefits of your treatment protocols are worth the political risks they create." Harrison leaned back in his chair, considering the intersection of medical ethics, personal protection, and interstellar politics. "Princess, do you feel stronger or weaker now that you're not dealing with chronic pain?" "Stronger," Lyra admitted. "Physically, mentally, emotionally. I have energy for diplomatic negotiations that I was previously spending on pain management. My cognitive function has improved. My emotional stability is better." "Then objectively, the treatment has made you a more effective leader," Harrison observed. "The question is whether Zolonian political culture values actual effectiveness or symbolic endurance." Before Lyra could respond, Harrison's security alerts activated with the urgent pattern that meant imminent threat to the protected person. His tactical display showed unauthorized movement in the embassy's outer corridors, multiple heat signatures converging on their location with movement patterns that suggested coordinated assault. "Princess, we have a problem," Harrison said, immediately shifting into protection mode while simultaneously pulling up evacuation routes and defensive positions. "Multiple hostiles approaching this location. We need to move to the secure area immediately." Lyra rose from her chair with the quick grace that Harrison's treatment protocols had restored, her body responding without the hesitation that chronic pain had previously caused. "How many?" "At least 6, possibly more," Harrison replied, guiding her toward the gymnasium's emergency exit while monitoring threat vectors on his tactical display. "They've bypassed external security, which means this is either an inside job or a very sophisticated operation." As they moved through the embassy's corridors, Harrison noted how differently Lyra responded to the emergency compared to their previous security drills. Without chronic pain limiting her mobility, she moved with confidence and speed, following his directions without the careful positioning that had been necessary when every movement caused discomfort. "Sergeant," Lyra said as they reached the secure checkpoint, their approach pattern suggests they're targeting me specifically rather than the embassy in general. Harrison paused in his security protocols to look at her with surprise. How do you know that? Because I've been trained in tactical analysis, Lyra replied. The traditionalist faction doesn't just question my political positions, they've been trained to evaluate threats and opportunities just as thoroughly as I have. Are you suggesting this attack is politically motivated rather than randomly targeting humans? Harrison asked, realizing that his understanding of the threat matrix might be incomplete. I'm suggesting that the traditionalists view my cooperation with human medical and security protocols as evidence that I've been compromised by alien influence, Lyra said. They may be staging this attack to demonstrate that human protection methods are inadequate. Harrison's tactical assessment immediately shifted as he realized they weren't just dealing with external threats, but with internal Zolonian politics that could turn a security situation into a test of competing cultural philosophies. Princess, if this is a politically motivated demonstration, what are the rules of engagement? Harrison asked. Am I protecting you from actual assassination attempts, or from a political theater designed to discredit your positions? Both, Lyra said grimly. In traditionalist political philosophy, there's no meaningful distinction between political defeat and physical elimination. The first explosion came from the embassy's main entrance, followed by the distinctive sound of Zolonian energy weapons discharging in controlled patterns. Harrison's tactical display showed the attackers moving through the building with precision that suggested detailed knowledge of embassy security protocols. They know our defensive positions, Harrison observed, guiding Lyra through backup corridors toward the embassy's most secure area. This level of intelligence suggests either significant surveillance or insider information. Or both, Lyra said. Sergeant, I need to tell you something that might affect your protection strategy. What? The lead attacker is probably my cousin Thane, who represents the traditionalist military faction, Lyra said as they reached the embassy's secure communication center. He's been trained in the same tactical systems I have, and he knows my movement patterns and decision-making processes. Harrison felt his tactical situation shift from difficult to nearly impossible as he realized he was protecting someone from family members who knew her as well as he was beginning to. Princess, when you say lead attacker, are we talking about someone who wants to kill you, or someone who wants to capture and interrogate you? We're talking about someone who wants to prove that cooperation with human culture has made me weak and unfit for leadership, Lyra said. The methodology he chooses to prove that point may vary depending on how the situation develops. The second explosion came from much closer, and Harrison's displays showed multiple heat signatures surrounding their position. He activated the embassy's emergency protocols while simultaneously calculating defensive options that would protect Lyra without necessarily resulting in the death of her family members. Princess, I need to know how you want me to respond if your cousin attempts to physically remove you from embassy protection, Harrison said, checking his weapon systems and defensive equipment. I want you to protect me using whatever methods you think are necessary, Lyra said firmly. But I also want you to understand that how you protect me will be evaluated as evidence of whether human security methods are superior to traditional Zolonian approaches. Harrison paused in his preparations to look directly at Lyra. Are you telling me that this entire situation is a test of competing protection philosophies? I'm telling you that everything about our relationship has been a test of competing cultural philosophies, Lyra said. The medical treatment, the security protocols, the way you've approached protection as collaboration rather than control, all of it represents a challenge to traditional Zolonian concepts of strength and leadership. The third explosion breached the secure area's outer defenses, and Harrison's displays showed Thane's assault team preparing for direct confrontation. As Harrison implemented final defensive protocols, he realized that the next few minutes would determine not just Princess Lyra's physical safety, but the future of human-Zolonian relations and possibly her own political survival. Princess, Harrison said, positioning himself between Lyra and the approaching threat while maintaining visual contact with multiple entry points, I want you to know that regardless of the political implications, my priority is keeping you safe. I know, Lyra said, and Harrison caught something in her voice that suggested their weeks of working together had created trust that went beyond professional obligation. Sergeant, whatever happens, I want you to know that your approach to protection, the medical care, the attention to my comfort and choices, the way you've treated me as a person rather than an object to be guarded, has shown me possibilities I didn't know existed." Before Harrison could respond, the secure area's main door exploded inward with the controlled precision of someone who knew exactly how much force would breach defenses without causing structural collapse. Through the smoke and debris, Harrison saw a figure in advanced Zolonian combat armor that made Princess Lyra's formal diplomatic clothing look like children's dress-up costumes. "Cousin Lyra," came a voice that carried the mechanical enhancement of military-grade vocal amplifiers, "you will come with us immediately. Your association with human weakness training has compromised your fitness for diplomatic responsibilities." "Cousin Thane," Lyra replied, her voice steady despite the weapons pointed in her direction, "I'm under the protection of the human embassy, and I choose to remain here." "Choice," Thane said, the word carrying contempt that translated clearly across species barriers, "is a luxury for those strong enough to enforce their decisions. Your human protector represents collaborative weakness rather than decisive strength." Harrison stepped forward, his movements careful and non-threatening despite having his weapon ready for immediate use. "Sir, Princess Lyra is under diplomatic protection. Any attempt to remove her from embassy premises would constitute an act of aggression against human territory." "Human territory," Thane repeated with amusement. "Sergeant, your protection protocols have already failed. We penetrated your security, bypassed your defenses, and reached the person you were tasked to protect. By any reasonable measure, your methods have proven inadequate. By reasonable measure, your methods have proven that you're willing to use overwhelming force against a diplomatic facility," Harrison replied evenly. "That says more about your approach to problem-solving than about the effectiveness of embassy security." "Interesting perspective from someone whose protection philosophy prioritizes comfort over capability," Thane said, his weapon systems targeting Harrison with the efficient precision of someone who'd been trained to eliminate threats quickly. "Tell me, Sergeant, has your gentle medical care made my cousin stronger or weaker?" Harrison glanced at Princess Lyra, noting how she stood without the pain-induced tension that had characterized her movements when they first met, how her responses to the crisis showed the quick thinking that chronic discomfort had previously interfered with. "Your cousin is stronger, faster, and more cognitively capable than she was 2 weeks ago," Harrison said. "The question is whether you define strength as the ability to endure unnecessary suffering, or as the ability to function at optimal capacity." "Optimal capacity?" Thane moved closer, his armor's targeting systems maintaining weapon lock while his body language suggested someone preparing for physical confrontation. "Sergeant, optimal capacity for a Zolonian leader requires the ability to make difficult decisions without being compromised by concerns for personal comfort." "And what difficult decision do you think I'm avoiding?" Princess Lyra asked, stepping partially around Harrison despite his protective positioning. "The decision to choose effective medical care over symbolic pain endurance. The decision to work with humans who treat me as an intelligent partner rather than a political symbol. The decision to prioritize Zolonian strength over alien weakness training," Thane replied. "Cousin, your human protector has convinced you that reducing pain makes you stronger, but strength comes from overcoming pain, not avoiding it. Strength comes from choosing the most effective path toward your goals," Lyra said, her voice carrying the authority that Harrison had learned to recognize as her natural leadership presence. "My goals include successful diplomatic relations with humanity and the development of Zolonian society beyond pure military culture. Goals that require you to abandon fundamental Zolonian values," Thane said, his weapon systems shifting to target Princess Lyra directly. "Values that include the understanding that leaders must be stronger than those they lead." Harrison felt his tactical assessment shift as he realized that Thane wasn't planning to capture Princess Lyra, he was planning to eliminate her as a political threat while demonstrating that human protection methods were inadequate to defend Zolonian royalty. "Thane," Harrison said, his voice carrying the calm authority he'd learned to use in medical emergencies, "before you make irreversible decisions, consider this: your cousin has been trained in the same tactical systems you have. The reason you were able to breach embassy security isn't because our methods are weak, it's because she provided you with the intelligence you needed to plan this operation. Explain, Thane said, though his weapon targeting remained locked on Princess Lyra. Princess Lyra knew you would come, Harrison continued, maintaining eye contact with the heavily armed Zalonian. She knew you would interpret her medical treatment as weakness, and she knew you would attempt to prove your point through demonstration of superior force. What you don't know is that she's been using our time together to develop countermeasures for exactly this scenario. Thane's armor systems cycled through what appeared to be threat reassessment protocols. You're suggesting that my cousin anticipated this operation? I'm suggesting that your cousin used human resources to prepare for traditional Zalonian responses to her political positions, Harrison said. The question is whether you're tactical enough to recognize when you've walked into a situation that was designed to test your assumptions about strength and weakness. Princess Lyra moved to stand beside Harrison, her positioning suggesting partnership rather than protection. Cousin, Sergeant Harrison's training included preparing for situations where the threat to my safety would come from our own people. Every security protocol, every medical treatment, every approach to protection has been designed with the understanding that traditionalist forces would eventually attempt exactly what you're attempting now. And what am I attempting? Thane asked, though his weapon targeting had shifted to assessment mode rather than immediate threat. You're attempting to prove that collaboration is weakness by using overwhelming force against someone who chose cooperation over confrontation, Lyra said. But what you've actually proven is that human methods prepared me to anticipate and respond to traditional Zalonian tactics. Harrison watched the tactical situation shift as Thane's certainty about the operation's success began to waver. Sir, Princess Lyra is stronger, better prepared, and more capable now than she was before human medical and security training. If your goal is determining which approach produces superior results, you might want to reconsider your evaluation criteria. Perhaps, Nurse Cathera's voice came from the secure area's communication system. You should also consider that the princess's human protector has been injured protecting her, yet continues to prioritize her safety over his own medical needs. Harrison looked down at his arm, where plasma scoring from the initial explosions had damaged his armor and created burns that he'd been ignoring during the crisis. Princess Lyra immediately moved to examine the injury, her movements showing the medical assessment skills that Harrison's training had taught her. Sergeant, you're injured, she said, her voice carrying concern that Thane's cultural training would interpret as evidence of weakness, but which Harrison recognized as evidence of the care that made protection worthwhile. I'm functional, Harrison replied, though he allowed Lyra to examine the burn while maintaining tactical awareness of Thane's position. Too careful for a soldier, Nurse Cathera observed from the communication system, but exactly right for a protector. Harrison watched Thane's reaction to the scene, a human soldier accepting medical attention from the Zalonian princess he was protecting, while maintaining defensive readiness and tactical awareness. The contradiction between traditional concepts of strength and the practical reality of effective protection seemed to be creating cognitive dissonance in the traditionalist leader. Cousin, Princess Lyra said, applying field dressing to Harrison's injuries while speaking to Thane, I want you to observe something important. Sergeant Harrison has been injured protecting me, but instead of hiding the injury to maintain appearance of strength, he allows me to treat it so that he can continue protecting me more effectively. Which approach actually serves the mission better? The standoff in the embassy's secure communications center stretched into the kind of tense silence that preceded either violence or revelation, with Thane's weapon systems maintaining target lock while Princess Lyra continued treating Harrison's plasma burns with the efficient care that human medical training had taught her. Cousin, Thane said finally, his voice carrying the confusion of someone whose tactical certainties had been challenged by unexpected variables, you're providing medical care to your protector while under direct threat. Traditional protocol would require you to prioritize your own safety over his comfort. Traditional protocol assumes that protector and protected have separate interests, Princess Lyra replied without pausing in her medical work. Human protocol recognizes that our safety is interdependent. If Sergeant Harrison is impaired by untreated injuries, my protection is compromised. Harrison felt the peculiar sensation of being simultaneously protected and protecting, a dynamic that his combat medic training had prepared him to understand but his cultural background had never quite anticipated. Sir, Princess Lyra is demonstrating tactical thinking that prioritizes mission success over adherence to symbolic protocols. Mission success, Thane repeated, his armor's targeting system cycling through what appeared to be threat reassessment algorithms. Define the mission parameters as you understand them. Protect Princess Lyra's physical safety, preserve her political viability, and maintain the diplomatic relationships necessary for long-term Zolonian-human cooperation, Harrison said, allowing Lyra to continue her medical work while monitoring Thane's responses. All three objectives are interdependent. And how has your human approach served these objectives? Thane asked. Princess Lyra is physically healthier, mentally sharper, and politically more effective than she was before human medical and security protocols, Harrison replied. She's also demonstrated the ability to anticipate and prepare for threats from traditionalist factions, which suggests that collaborative approaches actually enhance rather than compromise tactical capabilities. Thane lowered his weapon slightly, though his armor maintained defensive readiness. Cousin, explain your political calculations regarding this alliance with human methods. Princess Lyra completed her treatment of Harrison's injuries and stood to address Thane directly, her posture showing the confidence that came from pain-free movement and the support of someone who prioritized her well-being over cultural expectations. Thane, the traditionalist faction views any cooperation with human culture as contamination that weakens Zolonian values, she said. But what if cooperation actually strengthens our capabilities while preserving our essential identity? Explain. Sergeant Harrison's medical treatment eliminated chronic pain that was interfering with my cognitive function and physical performance, Lyra continued. His security methods taught me tactical approaches that complement rather than replace Zolonian training. His protection philosophy showed me that strength can include the wisdom to accept help when it improves overall effectiveness. And what have these lessons cost you? Thane asked. They've cost me the illusion that suffering is inherently valuable, Lyra replied. They've cost me the belief that accepting care represents weakness. They've cost me the assumption that Zolonian methods are superior simply because they're traditional. Harrison watched the exchange with growing understanding that this confrontation represented more than personal or political conflict. It was a collision between fundamentally different concepts of strength, leadership, and the relationship between individual and cultural identity. Thane, he said, stepping forward to stand beside Princess Lyra in a gesture that emphasized partnership rather than protection, I'd like to propose something that might resolve the apparent contradiction between traditional Zolonian values and collaborative human approaches. Propose what? A demonstration, Harrison said. Princess Lyra challenges you to single combat using the enhanced capabilities she's developed through human training methods. If traditional Zolonian strength proves superior, she accepts your judgment about the weakness of human collaboration. If her combined Zolonian human capabilities prove superior, you accept that cooperation can enhance rather than compromise strength. Princess Lyra looked at Harrison with surprise that quickly shifted to understanding and approval. Cousin, are you willing to test your assumptions about weakness against actual combat results? Thane's armor systems cycled through what appeared to be complex decision-making algorithms. You're proposing to settle philosophical differences through personal combat. I'm proposing to settle philosophical differences through demonstration of practical results, Princess Lyra corrected. You believe human methods have made me weak. I believe they've made me stronger. Combat will provide objective data about which assessment is accurate. And the stakes? Thane asked. If I win, you acknowledge that human collaboration can enhance Zolonian capabilities and you support continued diplomatic cooperation, Princess Lyra said. If you win, I accept exile from Zolonian space and renounce all political positions that involve human-Zolonian relations. Harrison felt his protective instincts warring with respect for Princess Lyra's autonomy as he realized she was wagering her entire political future on confidence in capabilities that his training had helped develop. Princess, are you certain about this approach? Sergeant, you've spent weeks teaching me that strength includes the wisdom to choose battles where your capabilities provide advantages, Lyra replied. This is such a battle. Thane stepped back and began removing the heaviest components of his assault armor, configuring for personal combat rather than military operation. Very well, cousin. But understand that I will not reduce the intensity of combat simply because you are family. I wouldn't expect you to, Princess Lyra said, moving to the secure areas training section where embassy protocol required space for diplomatic physical challenges. Sergeant Harrison, will you serve as combat monitor? Of course, Harrison said, though privately he was calculating medical response protocols for injuries that might result from combat between trained Zalonian warriors. Standard diplomatic combat rules, or traditional challenge protocols. Traditional challenge protocols, both cousins said simultaneously, their voices carrying the formal authority of people invoking ancient cultural procedures. As the cousins prepared for combat, Harrison activated medical monitoring systems and positioned emergency care equipment where it would be immediately accessible. Nurse Kathera's voice came through the communication system with what sounded like anticipation mixed with concern. Sergeant Harrison, she said, are you prepared for the possibility that traditional Zalonian combat training might prove superior to your enhanced medical and tactical approaches? Harrison watched Princess Lyra moving through warm-up exercises with the fluid grace that pain-free joints and optimized muscle function had restored, her movements showing integration of human flexibility training with traditional Zalonian combat techniques. I'm prepared for the possibility that I've been wrong about everything, he admitted. But I'm confident that Princess Lyra is stronger, faster, and more capable now than she was before human training methods. The question is whether those improvements translate to combat advantage against traditional techniques. The formal combat began with the ritual exchanges required by Zalonian challenge protocols, both cousins acknowledging ancestral traditions while preparing to test competing philosophies through physical demonstration. Harrison monitored vital signs, movement patterns, and tactical choices while mentally preparing for medical intervention if either combatant sustained serious injuries. What became apparent within the first few exchanges was that Princess Lyra's enhanced physical condition translated directly into combat advantages that Thane's traditional training hadn't anticipated. Her improved flexibility allowed for attack angles that traditional defensive patterns couldn't counter. Her pain-free movement enabled sustained effort without the compensation patterns that chronic injury created. Her enhanced cognitive function, freed from the constant background of managing discomfort, allowed for tactical innovations that surprised her traditionally trained opponent. Impossible, Thane said during a brief pause in combat, his voice carrying genuine confusion. Your techniques are Zalonian, but your physical capabilities exceed traditional parameters. My techniques are Zalonian enhanced by human optimization methods, Princess Lyra replied, breathing easily despite the intensity of their exchange. The combination creates capabilities that neither approach could achieve independently. The combat concluded with Princess Lyra achieving a submission hold that traditional Zalonian training recognized as decisive victory, but which she executed using joint mobility that human physical therapy had restored and maintained with pain management techniques that allowed her to ignore discomfort that would have distracted a traditionally trained warrior. Victory to Princess Lyra, Harrison announced formally, though privately he was amazed by the demonstration of how human medical methods had enhanced rather than compromised traditional Zalonian combat capabilities. Thane removed his combat helmet, his expression showing the cognitive reorganization of someone whose fundamental assumptions have been challenged by objective evidence. Cousin, your capabilities have been enhanced, not diminished, by human training methods. Yes, Princess Lyra said simply. Collaboration strengthened rather than weakened me. And Sergeant Harrison's protection methods have proven superior to traditional approaches because they prioritize my actual safety and effectiveness over symbolic adherence to cultural expectations, Princess Lyra said, moving to check on Harrison's treated injuries with the automatic care that their weeks of working together had made natural. Thane studied the interaction between Princess Lyra and her human protector, noting how their cooperation had created mutual enhancement rather than dependency. Perhaps, he said slowly, traditional evaluation criteria require updating. Perhaps, Princess Lyra agreed, strength includes the wisdom to recognize when cooperation creates better results than isolation. Harrison watched the resolution of the crisis with the satisfaction of someone whose unconventional methods had proven effective not through force or manipulation, but through patient demonstration that different approaches could enhance rather than compromise traditional values. Too careful for a soldier, Nurse Kethera observed from the communication system, but exactly right for someone who understands that the strongest protection comes from caring enough to help someone become their best possible self. 3 months later, Harrison stood in a newly established Joint Diplomatic Protection Training Center, where human medical and security methods were being integrated with Cylonian tactical traditions to create protection protocols that served the actual needs of diplomats rather than the symbolic requirements of competing cultural philosophies. Princess Lyra approached him carrying reports from the latest group of traditionalist warriors who had requested training in enhanced capability methods that combined the best of both cultures. Any regrets about challenging traditional approaches? Harrison asked, noting how she moved with the confident grace that optimal physical condition made possible. Only the regret that it took a crisis to demonstrate that caring for someone properly makes them stronger rather than weaker, Princess Lyra replied, settling beside him to review training protocols that would help other diplomatic teams discover the advantages of collaboration over competition. And us? Harrison asked quietly. Any regrets about how personal our professional relationship became? Princess Lyra looked at him with the smile that had become as familiar as his own reflection. Sergeant Harrison, you taught me that accepting care doesn't make someone weak, it makes them strong enough to care for others. No regrets about that lesson at all. Outside their window, the stars of deep space sparkled over a diplomatic facility where former enemies learned to protect each other not through dominance or submission, but through the kind of careful attention that recognized strength and vulnerability as partners rather than opponents in the complex dance of keeping people safe, healthy, and free to become their best possible selves.